Welcome to your Dream Coach podcast. My name is Shayla, and I am your host of this podcast where we really help people create that space to connect the dots from where you are to where you want to go. And I am just so excited after so many conversations over these last couple of weeks with some people really from all around the world. And one of the roles that I have as a coach is also a strategy coach. And so what I get an opportunity to do is really kind of hear people when they are in that place where they're stuck, they're looking for that change, and they know that there's something out there that they really, really want. But we all get caught in that place where I often find there's two key things that hold us back, which is that fear of failure or that fear of I'm not good enough. And that's really, as I mentioned before, because our brain is really designed to protect us. And although we really want that change, we really see those dreams, in our future, that idea of just taking that first step, the idea of taking action can often sometimes leave us feeling almost paralyzed. And so in today's episode, I am really going to dive into the idea of taking action. And, I'm sure if you were to think back to 2 years from today, or think back to 5 years from today, or even thinking back to 10 years from today, we've all gone through growth, through changes. And what's so powerful is to think about the person you were 5 or 10 years ago is totally different than the person you are today because you took action. And I often find when I'm doing a coaching session that really instills confidence in people really quickly when we think about not comparing ourselves to others, not thinking about who we want to be in the future, but really thinking about, man, is the person I am today, have I really grown since the person I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And the answer is almost 99.9% of the times, yes. And so I just want to encourage you and empower you to go back to that place of who you really were 5 years ago. Because at some point between then and now, you have taken action. And so when we think about just the power of perspective, I just want you to reflect on that for a minute, right? Reflecting on that idea of the choices that we made, over these last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years have gotten us exactly where we are today. And when we think about the choices that we make today moving forward in the future is exactly what we need to do in order to take action to get us closer to those dreams that we want to pursue. And when we really think about that perspective, is it oftentimes, like I say all the time, is just really creating that space to think about what it is that I want, why do I want it, but how am I going to get there? And so just like I encourage you to think back to 5 years ago and the growth you've had over the last few years, is think about who you want to be in 5 years into the future. And when we have that perspective, we just need to work backwards so that when it comes to taking action towards our dreams, instead of getting caught up in daily routines, responsibilities, or those doubts that make us hesitate, we can push our aspirations kind of, forward, right? Instead of to the back burner. And so when we encourage ourselves and we create that space to consider the larger picture of our lives, especially through the lens of what truly matters in the end, we really can gain a powerful shift in perspective. And that can fuel our motivation and clarify our priorities, which really allows us, going back to my main point of today's topic is that ability to take action. So as I shared, right, imagine fast forwarding to later years, or even imagining yourself, right, at the very, very end of your life. And, when you think back to looking back at everything, that you really wanted to accomplish, I often find that the three things that come up for people in their last, hours on the planet and hours of life is they really want to share the people that matter the most, the places that they've been, and the regrets, the things that they didn't do. And so it's sometimes as sad as it is to maybe think, the end of our lives, from that vantage point, what really stands out? So it's likely going to be, like I mentioned, right? The people you spent time with, the places you went, probably achievements along the way. And we don't want to get to that place where we have regrets, because what we want to have stand out is those tangible achievements, right? Maybe some of our accolades. And a lot of those minor worries of daily life would pretty much fade away in significance to the things that we really think about at the end of our life. So instead, the things that stay with us tend to be those that resonate at a deeper level, right? And as I've shared a few times already, right? The people that we've connected with, the places and experiences that we pursued, And, we want to make sure that we don't have those regrets, that anything that we have left undone. And so in coaching, the shift in perspective often becomes a turning point. So when we take the time to imagine what our future selves would advise, we can see clearly where we're holding back and where action is needed. So if our future self is really urging us to take this leap of faith, making that call, starting that project, traveling to that dream destination, then those nudges are the road signs pointing us toward a more fulfilled life. And when I do a lot of strategy calls with people, it's really clear that people show up where they know, hey, I actually have a lot of these gifts. These are my talents, these are my strengths. And a lot of times they really do have a very clear vision or goal of what they see for themselves. But where I feel like a lot of people get stuck is the how, right? What does that roadmap look like? And this is where this taking action really allows us to just map a plan out to take it step by step. And so this perspective reframe shows us that our dreams are more than just an idea, right? They're an essential part of the legacy that we leave behind. And so when you look at life this way, inaction becomes harder to justify. So we realize that waiting to act not only adds that risk of regret, but by taking even small steps today, we're building a life filled with meaningful experiences, achievements that will enrich our story and those around us. And so when we really just take that time to create that pause and think about where I am today and where do I want to go, that perspective really allows us the ability to transform the way that we see our dreams. They're not distance. They're not unattainable goals. They're invitations to live fully starting now. And when we think about getting to the end of our journey in life, is we want to avoid as much regret as possible. I have had an opportunity to do strategy calls with people in their 50s, 60s, even in early 70s. And one of the things that is really inspiring is that they're really in a place where they're like, I've got nothing to lose. And so how do we avoid some of that regret a little earlier on in life for those of us that, are maybe in our early 20s, 30s, 40s, and still have, a lot of working years left and a lot of living years where we can be pursuing our dreams. And so talking about regret often stems from that inaction. So when we think about those small actions that we could take towards a dream that maybe we've been putting off, that's where sometimes too I feel like a lot of anxiety comes from, is when we start thinking about the future, things that haven't happened, because we don't break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces. And so emphasizing that fear of what if it doesn't happen, or uncertainty if I fail. And oftentimes what I've found with coaching clients is just getting clear on that vision, but just breaking that roadmap down so it's little bite-sized pieces, right? And taking the first step is often the hardest, but it's the most rewarding. And so when we think about avoiding regret, it's a powerful motivator for sure for taking action. Sometimes that fear can sort of paralyze us, but when we've taken time to get really clear as to how we're going to do step by step, especially when it comes to pursuing our dreams, we want to be able to use that as that motivation. And so regret is one of those emotions that can weigh heavily on us, and often emerging not just from the things that we did, but from the things that we didn't do, the chances we missed, the opportunities we didn't seize, right? And the dreams that we never really dared to pursue. And so when we recognize that the string of missed opportunities can be far worse than the temporary discomfort of a risk or failure, it does become easier to see why taking action does matter so much. And one of the common sources of regret that people express is that feeling of having let time slip away without taking action toward what truly mattered to them. So whether it's starting a passion project, building a business, nurturing relationships, or even seeking adventure, inaction can lead to a deep sense of what if in the future. And what's particularly challenging about regret is that, unlike disappointment or failure, it can't be undone. It can't be fixed. Once the time is gone, it's gone. And what we think about when we think sort of about avoiding regret as a driving force, it does shift our relationship with fear. And many of us delay taking action because we fear failure, judgment, or uncertainty. However, when we ask ourselves, will I regret not taking this chance? We tap into a totally different kind of motivation. And this question brings clarity, making the fear of failure pale in comparison to the fear of the future filled with what ifs. And so taking action, even if it is a small first step, It's an antidote to regret. And so even those small steps towards a dream is progress. And even if things don't unfold perfectly, we at least have the satisfaction of knowing we tried, and which often brings a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. So unlike missed opportunities, actions, no matter the outcome, can be built upon, learned from, and adjusted, right? And in contrast, regret over an action does leave us with little to work with. And it becomes a closed door that we can only wish that we had walked through. So one of the things I've done with my clients is a really helpful exercise is to avoid focusing on things that aren't happening or didn't happen, and avoiding that regret is picture yourself looking back on your life in 5, 10, even 20 years. Consider where you want to be, what dreams or goals you'd feel disappointed for not having pursued. Use that vision as a catalyst to start stepping, towards those dreams, even if they're small or imperfect. And remember, the greatest dreamers are often achieved through a series of tiny, consistent actions rather than massive leaps. Something that was shared with me years ago was that people are recognized, or they shine in the spotlight, but it's not just for what they're doing in the spotlight that really matters. It's what they're doing in the dark. And when we think about the world today, we think about the Instagram reels and, highlight reels, right? And people really posting things on social media to sort of make their life look really, really fantastic, which I think it's great when people are sharing, magic moments, as I call them, because when we're in a good place in life, it's inspiring to see that. It fires me up to see people living their best lives and going on trips and achieving things, because I genuinely feel happy for them. But what I really want to share is that the reality is that what people are doing behind the scenes, what they're doing in the dark, right? The late nights, the early mornings, the extra workouts, the extra emails, right? The extra planning, that is what's allowing them to live the life of their dreams, right? And so we really want to have that perspective, is that when we think about taking action, it's just necessarily a straight line, right? As we know, success is sort of a roller coaster. But when we know where we want to get to the end, that roller coaster ride can be a beautiful thing. And so when we think about how to really take action, and just some ways that we can take action, even right after the podcast today, is getting really clear on your goals. And I often, when I run dream workshops and sort of workshops that I'm helping people get clear on their goals, is I often encourage people to just take space to think about 100 dreams. And for those of you listening, if that seems extremely overwhelming, you're like, oh my gosh, how in the world would I ever think of 100? That is totally cool. Start with 3 to 5, right? Start with 3 to 5. And if you Google Matthew Kelly's The Dream Manager, he is somebody that way back in 2007, through the company I was working with, really brought to light the power of dreams. And I really believe that this has, been woven throughout my life since those moments of learning about the power of dreams. Is he walks through different categories, and it's just a really fantastic way to not just have dreams that are materialistic, but legacy dreams and, psychological dreams. And there are, travel and adventure, but it's a neat way to build a dreams list on a variety of different topics. And so if that's really overwhelming, hey, let's just start with 3 to 5 dreams, but get really clear on that. When I've looked back at my dream book and I think about things, even just starting this podcast, is that something I wrote down years ago? And of course, those doubts came in, right? Fear of failure, fear of I'm not good enough. And then last December, I was like, meh, what do I got to lose, right? And so anything in life that we really want to go after, we do want to get really clear on it. So again, you've heard me share many times, what is it that you want? Why do you want it? And then how are we going to get there? So just taking that time to thinking about, what's a place in 2025 you want to travel to? What's maybe a personal goal of yours? Maybe what's something that's just even like a habit, right? What are some things that are going to allow you, to get clear on, that are going to put you in a different place in even a year from today by just taking action? And then when you've got those 3, 4, 5 dreams, maybe you just start with one, is breaking it down into super small steps. Analogy I'll often use with my coaching clients is, the best way to eat an elephant is just one bite at a time. And so we just want to also think about this when we think about going after our goals, right? is, man, when we think about, saving up for a trip to Bora Bora, or getting this next promotion at our company, or maybe it's, losing a weight or building a certain muscle, right? Is it's not just going to happen overnight. And so the best way to tackle something a lot bigger than something that we can just do overnight is just step by step, day by day. And then it's also going to be really important when we think about taking action is not just to have this urgency right now in this moment, but to set timelines and milestones, and also just being realistic and just working with the reality of your life, right? So if your goal is to launch a business, breaking that down into all the different steps that have to come into play, from research, planning, product development, right? And breaking that down, and then just checking it off. Maybe it's once a week or once a month, you're just starting to work on that. Maybe it is saving for a larger trip and you're like, you know what, right now my bank account isn't going to allow for that. But hey, in a year from today, if I was to put, $25 a week, if I was to make these changes, that absolutely can be a reality. For some people, maybe it's getting a second job, maybe it's getting a third job, right? If we want to live a big life and we need more financial means, right? Money is a resource. There's lots of it. We're not limited on the resource of money. We just have to get creative on how do we find more ways to allow us to earn more money so that we can be working towards these goals, right? How do you have reminders, right? So maybe there is an accountability buddy. Maybe there's a reminder in your phone. For those of you that have read Atomic Habits, it's a really wonderful way when you're trying to implement change to tie it to something you're already doing. So for some reason, I always think of drinking coffee in the morning, right? If that's a habit you do and it's something that's just natural to non-negotiable, well, how do you add, maybe drinking that coffee and then mixing in, your greens right after that or before that, right? So how do we do something where maybe it's checking our emails, but before check our emails, we're going to spend 10 minutes researching for our new business, right? So if it's important to you, you will find a way to make it happen. And a great way to do that is to have that accountability, but adding it into your life with something that is already happening. And just as you start to take action towards the bigger pictures, just remember to celebrate those milestones. We have all had so much growth in our lives, no matter where you're at today. All of us were babies. And at some point, we didn't know how to crawl, and then we had to learn to walk. And we failed hundreds, if not thousands of times to just learn how to walk. And I would say that majority of you listening today, if you are blessed to have the health and strength to be walking, you're doing that. And that was something that you failed at so many times. And we often forget because we can get caught in this comparison of other people and what's not working for us. And let's focus on what is going great. Let's focus on what we do want. What can we take action on today? But let's focus on also celebrating those little wins along the way. And I want to leave you with the last thought around taking action is just building this legacy, building a life of your dreams. I often say to people, when they ask me different questions about traveling or my marriage or kids or whatever it is that this is my life. My husband is a big part of my life. My kids are a big part of my life. Traveling, my animals, my family, my business. It's all like a big pie. And all of those are little pieces. But at the end of the day, when I take my last breaths on earth, I want to know that I lived my life to the fullest. And so when we think about that legacy being passed on, we think about just really committing to our life, not being defined by hesitation, but by bold steps forward. We want to take action towards our dreams. We're not only shaping our lives, but we are creating a legacy that inspires others and leaves a lasting impact. A legacy with action means we know that we are following our goals, taking risks, and making our dreams a reality because we want to live the best life. And so it's really about being intentional and choosing growth and showing up for ourselves and our dreams and taking action every single day because we are blessed with every breath, with every day to be in this beautiful space where it's not all sunshine and roses, but we have the ability to make whatever we want happen at our fingertips. And so choosing to live this life with intention and act on our dreams, you are building a story of resilience, courage, dedication that can uplift others. And it's a legacy that speaks louder than words, showing that a life well lived is one where dreams are not just imagined, but they are pursued wholeheartedly. And by taking this action, you're going to create a life that not only fulfills you, but it serves as a lasting impression for future generations. And so as we wrap up today, I just really urge you to take one bold step towards your dream today in just honor of creating a life that you are going to be so proud to look back on. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of your Dream Coach podcast. If you love this episode, please share on your social medias, and you can tag me at shayla.way.coaching. There's lots of exciting things in the pipeline that I'm going to be excited to share with you in these coming weeks and months. But remember, as I often tell my kids, majority of the days is to just continue to work hard, be kind, and dream big. Appreciate you all for taking the time to listen today. Go out there and take some action.